Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. We're entering the third phase of this video lecture series. We've covered culture, we've covered worldview and its associated concepts, and now we're into origins. And we're looking at the origins of scientific models. This is part 3, lecture part 3. What we're into is, from this house diagram that I'm standing in front of and I can't get out of the way of, you see the zero part, which would be the culture, which would be the Weltbild, which is the influences of our thinking patterns. Again, like I said before, when you go to another culture, right away you understand that there's different thinking processes going on. You try to navigate in a busy place, and it's difficult. And right away you know that there's different thinking processes happening. This is where culture comes in. Culture cultivates within us a type of tendency, a type of way of seeing things. So in other words, not everybody sees the way that I see things, and not everybody perceives things the same way. So that's culture on the bottom. The number one is the foundation, and the foundation is our assumed source of reliable knowledge. Where do we go to get it? And in this house, what we're starting with is the logical knowledge. Logical knowledge is our assumed source, and then we built up 4 different basic beliefs on that reliable source of knowledge, which involved closed system. And those 4 basic beliefs are basic to that foundation. And now those basic beliefs in place now support the second floor. And that second floor that we're putting on now is called a theoretical system of thought. And what is that theoretical system of thought? Well, it's Western natural philosophy. And that comes from the fact that, one, we've explored theory, and what theory was in its basic meaning is meaning to observe, to look out at something through a grid. And so it's kind of like I have my assumptions, I have my principles, I have my rules, and through that network or system, I am looking at something. So that is why this is a theoretical system of thought. Theoretical meaning it's a system to look out at. It's a system to look through, trying to understand the outside world. It's Western because that is the culture that is undergirding the whole thinking process. It is natural because that is separated off of supernatural. And so we are within the domain, working within just the natural domain within this house. So it's Western, it's natural, and it's philosophy, which is a systematic way of looking at things, taking into consideration all the rules, the basic beliefs, the foundation, and, well, actually philosophy doesn't go to ground zero. It starts with the epistemological source, so it's the foundational source. So it's a grid. Natural is the domain that defines what our reality really is. So that is our house. We now have a second floor. Now on this second floor, we are putting 3 columns up, and those columns represent methods of getting to reliable knowledge. Once you have a source, you have to have a method of extracting it from that source. And so since it's logical knowledge, we are looking at different methods that have been used in history past, favorite methods of getting to that source. Like I said before, is that choosing a primary source of reliable knowledge does not exclude other sources. It just makes a primary source. And it can exclude other sources like revelation, but it does not exclude like sources that would be like, if it's based on human reason, then human observation, empirical knowledge. Empiricism would also be an acceptable, compatible source of knowledge. So what we have here is our three columns that we're going to put up on this second floor. And the first column is the first method. And the first method is reason. It's logical reasoning. It's reasoning. And so if our source is logical knowledge, then our way to get through it is through reasoning processes. Is it reasonable? And reason is based on, and logic, on the preceding network of structure, which would be the rules or the basic beliefs and the foundation. And so our first pillar, first method, is represented by the rationalists. Now we go up to a second pillar. And during historical times, these methods were competitive with each other. There were different schools, actually, of philosophers that were not, let's say, they weren't real friendly towards each other. But the second pillar is represented by the empiricists. And empiricist means empirical, means perceived through the five senses, human five senses. So empiricism would be a way of getting to reliable knowledge would be through the grid of the five senses. So in most of the biggest one that is used of the five senses is observation. And so when they say empirical knowledge, usually it has to do with visual. Usually it has to do with observation. So this group of philosophers built truth off of what could be observed. We have one more column, one more pillar. And this pillar, the third pillar, is represented by the skeptics. So we have the rationalists, the empiricists, and the skeptics. And who are the skeptics? The skeptics saw that rationalism could fail at certain times, and it was limited. So it did not have all knowledge. And not everybody reasoned the same together. So they would say rationalism is okay. It's human-based, but it's fallible. It has limits. And then they looked at empiricism, and they would say, well, man really has the lower limits on visual observation. There's in the animal world, there's others that have much more acute awareness and vision, frequencies. And so, and again, their observations are limited to what they have observed, and they haven't observed everything. So we can't make a pronouncement of truth. So we suspend judgment until there's more evidence. So the skeptic would suspend judgment. The skeptic would say, we can't say there's truth. We can't say that we've got there. The only thing we can say is that we suspend judgment. So those were the three primary methods used in the history of philosophy as epistemological methods of getting to reliable knowledge. Well, in the later 1800s, these three methods came together to form what is known today as the scientific method. Okay, so that's where we're going with this. We're building a house that is going to take us to science and how to do science. So, starting with rationalism, the hypothesis, you start with a grid. Before you can observe, you have to have a grid of what to observe. You have to have a grid. You have to have a theoretical system. Okay, so we start with a hypothesis, which is built on rationalism. Then we apply it to an experiment. An experiment based on empiricism is based on human perception, human senses of what can be perceived. So then you apply it to observation, empiricism. And then once you've applied it, then you see where you have to adjust things. You have to adjust the hypothesis. You adjust the theory, maybe, of how to view things. You're looking through it, and then you repeat, and you keep repeating the process. It's a cycle. It's not linear. It's not here and end. It's here, here, and repeat. Here, here, and repeat. And so that is skepticism, where it meets in. So what we have here is in the 1800s, the three methods came together to be known today as the scientific method. That was in the 1800s. There's a lot that happened in the 1800s. And a pivotal point in the 1800s was in the 1850s. I guess you would say that was middle of the century. But we have another quote here by Friedrich Nietzsche. He once wrote, "It is not the victory of science that distinguishes our 19th century, but the victory of the scientific method over science." Chew on that. What's that mean? Well, what that means is that you got the rules, and out of those, or basic beliefs, and out of those basic beliefs come methods. Can you, through those methods, test whether or not there exists a God, a revelation, a spirit, a power, a that? And it would be no. Why? Is it reasonable? It's against the basic beliefs, because the basic belief is a closed system. It can't be observed or repeated. It can't be confined to an experimental process in a laboratory. So, to be true and reliable knowledge, one, it has to be reasonable. And it has to be reasonable according to the rules or the basic beliefs of that system, which is closed system. Two, if it's past being reasonable, then it must be empirical, observable, on demand, and repeatable at any time. So you're actually putting clamps on what can be defined as real and reality. And that is what Friedrich Nietzsche is celebrating. He says it's not the victory of science that distinguishes our 19th century, but the victory of the scientific method over science. You got it? Okay, that's where we're going. So we've got culture that gives us tendencies. We then choose a reliable source for our knowledge. And out of that reliable source, then we mine out the corollaries or the basic beliefs that are in line with that basic source. And that those basic beliefs then support a system, a theoretical system that is formed. And that theoretical system then has methods of how to apply that to the outside world. Are you still with me? I hope so, because we still have a little bit more to go. We're about halfway through. So, again, we're Tim and Holly, and if you'd like to communicate with us, it's through the blogspot, through doubleroadrover.com, or email thn.academia@gmail.com. Again, thanks for joining me. Hope to see you in the next one.